Twitter faces the music, kids break up with Facebook, and we look ahead to the coolest gadgets for the rest of the year. It's the CNET UK Podcast. I'm Richard Trenholm. Joining me is Katie Collins. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great, thank you.
Great.
Back from IFA.
A week in Berlin, looking
Yes.
at exciting new products.
Yes. I mean, some of them were exciting. I'll tell you more about that a little later in the show. But,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So to kick off, I mean, it's all going off over in the US, isn't it? There's a lot of hearings and I guess panels, people being interrogated.
Well, I mean, it's been fairly quiet news week here in the UK, and then sort of yesterday afternoon, yesterday evening, it all kicked off on Twitter, and everyone was going mad for various news, some of which actually involved Twitter. Now we've had Jack Dorsey, Twitter's CEO, testifying at Jack, testifying before Congress this week.
That's right.
And he's been trying to defend the platform from allegations of bias, especially in the direction of conservative news and conservative tweeters. One particular thing that he's been forced to kind of, he hasn't addressed it, but he's been asked about it, is whether Trump's tweets are abusive, and he's carefully dodged questions on this. And a lot of people have been complaining for a while now about whether Donald Trump and some of the things that he's tweeting should basically violate Twitter's rules of conduct, and whether if anyone else had tweeted them, whether they would be allowed to remain on the platform. Up until now, Twitter has always said, and now as well actually, has always said that it's important to have a figure such as Donald Trump on the platform, because he contributes so much to the kind of the conversation, and is such a public figure, and things that he say are in the public interest. But
yeah, it's worth pointing out, I mean, that Twitter isn't actually that big. It has a kind of outsized significance in the minds of some commentators and journalists and politicians, when it actually isn't anywhere, in terms of sheer numbers, it isn't anywhere near as big as the billions of people who use Facebook. But then, of course, Donald Trump's his proclamations are sort of made through Twitter, and that gives Twitter this kind of outsized kind of impact in people's minds. And yeah, it's a tough one. So a lot of the things that are being talked about with that Jack Dorsey has been asked about by US senators, things like interference in elections and advertising that potentially is interfering in democracy. These aren't necessarily things that are such a big issue on Twitter. There are possibly more things that should be addressed at Facebook. But obviously Zuckerberg has had his moment in the spotlight, and will probably again have his moment in the spotlight. But for now, it's Twitter that are up in front of them.
Well, in front of this Senate Intelligence Committee, it's been Jack Dorsey from Twitter, and Facebook and Google were also invited. Now, Zuckerberg didn't come this time, but he sent his second in command, Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook's COO. They've been chatting about what these companies are doing to protect the integrity of midterm elections, so that we don't have a repeat of what happened, a few years ago, and have all of these. So that voters really understand what role these platforms are playing, and hopefully they're not exploited again. That's
right.
In the same way they were previously.
The US midterm elections coming up in November, which is the middle of the president's time in office,
which seems crazy, doesn't it? Because
it does. It
feels like he was just elected, but
and so these elections, they're often seen as a referendum, really, about how the president's doing, but they're electing lesser officials. But it'll be interesting to see, if the Republicans can keep hold of control of the House and that kind of thing. It's interesting looking across the pond at all this kind of stuff. Because it affects us so much, the way that if the government does decide to, the US government does decide to regulate Facebook, how is that going to affect us and the elections that we have over here? So yeah, it's interesting stuff. But I mean, it very much seems that putting these guys on the stand, people like Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg on the stand, they don't really give us any kind of piercing answers. I don't know if we're necessarily making much progress, but it's certainly interesting. Google, it should be noted, didn't turn up.
Nope.
No,
there was an empty chair.
There was an empty chair for Google, yeah.
Yeah.
They weren't feeling lucky, I guess you might say. They didn't have the answers for once, yeah.
No.
Someone who did turn up was Alex Jones, conspiracy theorist and a guy who was recently pretty much unilaterally booted off various social media platforms.
Including Twitter.
Although they took a little bit of time to think about it, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, so there's talk of Jack Dorsey kind of personally being involved in some of these decisions and saying, no, we've got to keep these guys on the platform. No, he hasn't really sort of given us too much to get excited about with his testimony. Interestingly enough, speaking of Facebook, we've seen numbers recently over the past year. Facebook's had a pretty torrid time, and so we've seen numbers that suggest that as many as 44% of younger users aged between 18 and 29 have deleted the Facebook phone app in the past year. That's nearly half of 18 to 29-year-old users. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, as somebody who has been 29 this year, I'm no longer 29. I can say that I am among these users. I deleted Facebook from my phone, probably actually when I was 28. 2017. I think is when I deleted Facebook off my phone. And honestly, I think a big part of it is just as you see. It does kind of come in waves, I think. And when you see your peer group and the people around you using it less, the people that you're closest to, then you're just less inclined to use it yourself because it's just not the best way of keeping in touch with people and connecting with people anymore. And so I can understand why why it kind of happens in sort of specific age groups. And I do understand as well why people might not really want to have Facebook anymore.
The shine's definitely come off a little bit. I mean, I should point out these are American users as well, by the way.
Yes.
And also younger users are quite likely to be on other platforms, aren't they? Like Snapchat and Instagram, especially, which is of course a Facebook brand.
Yes.
So it's all very well deleting Facebook and saying you don't have anything to do with Facebook anymore, but if you're still using Instagram, you're still in hock to Zuckerberg and et al. So there you go.
Yeah.
I don't know who Al is. But there you go. In more local news, I guess you might say, but still looking at these American tech giants and the way they interact with other countries, Netflix and Amazon are looking likely to be forced to stream more European shows in the EU. So this is all about the amount of local content that video streaming services have to provide. And so Netflix and Amazon are going to be regulated by the EU. They have to provide 30% of their content would have to be European regulated. Would have to be European productions.
Yes.
So stuff like The Crown.
Yeah.
And Marseille.
I mean, I heard somebody say that that Netflix has resisted this, and they've actually already implemented a similar rule in Germany. And I've heard that Netflix really resisted it there, but actually they're not that far away from this quota apparently anyway, which is really interesting to see. And I've some of the it's really difficult for producers outside of the US in the past to get big television series made, and obviously here in the UK, because we're English language speaking, then we do kind of have a great heritage of original television content. We have probably an easier time of it. We do have shows like like you say, The Crown, and we have other shows that are kind of produced primarily in the UK by even big companies like HBO. Like things like Game of Thrones is pretty much all done kind of in Europe. Now, I think the one thing that I would really like to see out of this is some interesting shows coming out of different European countries. I personally think that some of the best TV that's been made over the past few years has come from other countries. So, for example, there was a TV show made by the Norwegian television kind of the national broadcaster over there called Scam. They've done an American remake of it, but honestly, it was one of the best things that I've watched. And I went to Norway, and I have Norwegian friends and watched it there. but you couldn't watch it outside of Norway because, you know, if things are because of licensing reasons. And it would be great to see shows like that actually have kind of got this cult audience online for globally, get the kind of the recognition and exposure that I really think that they deserve. It'd be great to see some new shows coming out of countries like that and available to everyone.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's worth pointing out that Netflix, I think, has been responsible for making shows in other languages available, and not segregating them off into different places. You know, not kind of having a section for German TV and a section for, but just putting, you know, shows like Dark and you know, shows that are even in foreign languages, not even flagging that they're in a foreign language, just putting them in with the other crime shows or the other, you know, comedy shows or whatever, and really mixing it up. And I think that's really interesting. So Netflix, I think, deserves, you know, I don't think this sort of should be seen as like slapping rules on Netflix that it wouldn't otherwise have done. I do think that Netflix is actually quite good at opening up these kind of international sort of content things. But it'll be interesting to see, you know, if once we're coming out of the EU, because apparently that is a thing that we have to do.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to see if what that does to Netflix here in the UK. And you know, it's worth pointing out as well that you know, the English language thing does mean that the UK and UK broadcasters are quite often involved in joint collaborative productions. So there'll be shows that are kind of joint produced with here and the US. And so we do see like quite a few British shows do have a bit of a sort of cult and even a crossover kind of mainstream hit audience in the US. But it's I mean, interesting to see what Amazon does with this as well, because Netflix is kind of further ahead with their original shows, and they're producing stuff like Marseille in France and Dark in Germany, and they've produced Spanish language stuff. They've produced stuff in all sorts of various different countries, and it'll be interesting to see if Amazon kind of do the same. And then also there's people like Hulu as well, and all those other kind of streaming services.
I think Netflix is probably the service that will thrive the most in this environment. I think because I mean it's got money to spend on original content, as we've seen.
Lots of money.
Whereas I think smaller streaming services might be hit harder by this because they perhaps don't have the same. I mean, it is done proportionally, of course. So, you know, it's 30%, so 30% of whatever they have to spend, I suppose. But ultimately, I think it might be more difficult for smaller streaming services that are just making fewer shows overall to keep up.
That's a good point. And in fact, actually, we're going to see, you know, it's all very well Amazon and Netflix are very big and they have very big broad catalogs. So it's probably not going to be that difficult for them to meet this quota. But then if you look at some of the new streaming services that are coming up soon, like, for example, the big one that's coming up is going to be Disney's streaming service. And are they going to be affected by this? If they're going to have all the Marvel shows and all the Marvel movies and all the Star Wars movies and all that kind of thing, are they then going to have to correspondingly produce British shows and French shows and stuff as well? Like, how's that going to work with them? So it'll be interesting to see what they do, but we have no idea when that's going to happen. Apple also launching a streaming service at some point soon. They're banking on big names for theirs. So they're making a TV version of the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov. So if you're a big sci-fi novel nerd, then look out for that one. That's quite exciting.
Yeah, I mean, Apple and Amazon, as we know, Amazon had some great news this week when it became a $1 trillion company. Apple is already a $1 trillion company. It's not like they are struggling for cash to spend in these different ways.
Exactly.
So
they can afford to bankroll another series of like Red Dwarf or something, I'm sure.
Yeah. So hopefully, you know, we'll see some great stuff coming out of Europe from all of them. Speaking
of Amazon, just a bit of a digression. Amongst all the kind of politicians targeting American tech giants, Bernie Sanders, who you may remember from such elections as the last one they just had, he has launched an act through the Senate called the Stop Bad Employers by Zeroing Out Subsidies Act.
Ooh,
and
catchy.
Catchy, yeah. But if you want to make that a little bit catchier, you could call it the Stop Bezos Act, which is, of course, the name of it. The acronym is Bezos, which is of course the name of Amazon's boss, Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, I believe.
So, am I right in thinking this is to protect Amazon workers?
Amazon workers, yes, that's right. So it's the idea of this act is to require big corporations like Amazon and Walmart to pay the government for the sort of assistance programs that their workers use, like food stamps, public housing, Medicaid, and that kind of thing. But I just thought that was an amusing bit of trolling there from Bernie Sanders, naming his act in that way. Anyway, and speaking of Europe, you've just spent a bit of time over there. What was it like? How was your week in Berlin looking at all the latest at IFA?
Berlin was delightful as always.
Right, good.
IFA was
delightful as always.
Messy and crazy as always.
For those of you who aren't aware, this is a big annual technology trade show where all the kind of big technology manufacturers, they get together in Berlin every year, and they have done for decades, in fact, and they announce their new stuff. They show off their new wares.
Yes, that's correct. So this is it's actually Europe's largest trade show, tech trade show, but we don't often see many phones there. So we usually see a kind of the big slew of phones announced earlier in the year at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. Now we did see a couple of phones at IFA, primarily ones that are kind of for Europe only, Europe and Asia only, rather than ones that are going to be announced in the US. But there was one phone that caught my eye. I was rather surprised, I have to say, because it's not something that I would usually be drawn to.
Okay, yeah.
And that was the BlackBerry Key 2 LE.
What year is this?
Yes, I know. And in the past, I've not always been the biggest fan of BlackBerry phones, but I think that it's a really interesting device. I think BlackBerry
is it though.
It's firstly it's brilliant value.
Okay.
It's got a QWERTY keyboard still, so if you're still in the market for one of those. Which apparently
Somebody
people are.
is, yeah.
And also it's running the latest version of Android, and it's got a huge touchscreen as well. But it's effectively it's kind of I think when BlackBerry started making phones again, they presumed that most of their customers would be kind of business people and enterprise users. And actually, what they found is that it's younger people and consumers who are buying their phone. A little bit like it as happened when BlackBerry was popular. When BlackBerry was popular.
Round,
I was going to say the first time round, but I don't think we can say that they're popular a second time round yet.
Yeah.
It might be a bit premature.
When they were around.
Yeah.
When they were a thing.
And they became really popular among teenagers and younger users who were primarily attracted to it for BBM.
Free messaging, yeah.
Yeah. They've got this phone. It's a cheaper version of the flagship phone that they brought out earlier this year. That phone I think is around the £600 mark. This phone is around the £300 to £400 mark. And it's still a kind of like premium phone, really nice looking. And they've actually done something quite unexpected for BlackBerry in that they've experimented with colour. It's like they've discovered it.
Well, that was always the thing, wasn't it? Like they, the kids loved the free BlackBerry messaging. This was before WhatsApp. This was before Facebook Messenger, and they loved the free messaging. And BlackBerry just didn't seem to know what to do with that, and they kept making these like boring grey business brick phones, and kids couldn't get enough of them. But yeah, so if only they'd figured this out probably about 10 years ago.
Yeah, so they've made this phone in a kind of quite a bog standard sort of slate grey blue colour, and then they've got a champagne gold version which is quite snazzy, and then they've also got an atomic red version which is actually quite cool. It's got like all of these red accents around it, and it's the kind of phone that people would look at and be like, hang on a sec, what is that? Which you don't get much of in 2018 because so many phones just look the same.
Yeah.
And obviously there's this BlackBerry phone. It's got this like deep red. It's got this QWERTY keyboard, and I think it's the kind. I've had red phones before, and I know that people are a bit like, it does catch people's eye a little bit, and they want to know what it is. So for people that want to make a bit of a statement as well, I think this could be quite a popular option.
Having a BlackBerry in 2018 is making quite a statement.
It really is.
But it's fun seeing all these kind of like classic brands. If they fail for long enough, but they cling on, eventually they'll loop back around. So we're seeing these kind of retro Nokias over the past year or two. We've had the banana phones come back, and now BlackBerry's back as well.
Exactly. So there are a couple of interesting features as well that come on the software side that it's going to actually roll out to its flagship phone as well. One of which is the ability to clone certain apps. So you can have two versions of, I think at the moment it's Instagram, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp and WeChat, and it's working on more. It's something that BlackBerry's doing in-house. It's not something it's working on developers with.
Why?
The idea is that, it's seeing increasingly people managing multiple accounts on...
Your Finsta.
Yeah,
as
your
I believe the
Finsta.
kids might
Or
refer
if
to
you,
that.
or if you're somebody that needs access to kind of a big company Instagram account
Okay,
or something like that, and you don't want to just be switching accounts within the app.
Sure.
So you can actually put.
Don't mix them up.
It's got
That's my
BlackBerry's also got a special kind of locker feature. This allows you to put certain apps into it sandboxes them, and if you try and enter the app, it provides a sort of almost like a second layer of authentication by you have to use your thumbprint again to just access the app. So it really locks those apps down. So if you've got a version of Instagram that is a company version that you can and you want to, you will need your fingerprint to access it, and it's separate from your own personal.
Okay.
So it's that kind of thing. So they're working on bringing more of that to the phone, and they're also working on better, because this obviously the specs aren't quite as good as they are for the main flagship phone. It's much cheaper, so that's what you would expect, and it's got a smaller battery. So it's working on bringing some new power management features. For example, if you've forgotten to charge your phone, it will look at your calendar and your diary and your daily habits to kind of like find a spot where it thinks this would be a good time for you to charge it. You're not doing anything else then, and it will give you a reminder and be like, hey, like charge your phone now, and like
that's cool. It's like you're having a nap. I'm gonna power down a bit.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
So yeah, so it's
that's quite clever actually. I like that.
Yeah,
that's a good. That's
so
good
like thing. So BlackBerry actually surprised me.
I'm surprised. I was thinking wrap this up, but actually that was quite interesting. That is probably more time than we spent talking about BlackBerry for years.
Exactly.
Cool.
Just give them. I mean, that's it for the next year now. It's had its lot. The other phone news out of IFA was not actually a launch. It was just the launch date for the next big Huawei flagship phone, the Huawei Mate 20, and that's going to be on the 20th of October in London. Ooh. So we will be attending that event.
Exciting, in person, yeah.
Yes, and that's something to look forward to.
And so IFA is, obviously, like I said, the phones are usually earlier in the year at MWC, but IFA is well known for its home stuff. So, for example, there's always a lot of big TVs, right? Really big TVs. Did you see the big TVs?
Well, yes, we did. We saw lots of huge TVs, and in particular, we saw Samsung's 8K TV. 8K TV. It's the Q900, and I think if I'm right, it might be. I'm just going to check this. I think it's 95 inches the screen.
Okay. They didn't go for the 100. They were so close. They thought, should we just go for it? But 8K though.
Yeah. So I mean, we've talked a lot about 4K before, and our conclusion is that it's a nice to have, but it's not. There comes a point where, especially if you're talking about a TV in your lounge, increasing the resolution isn't going to make much difference because our eyes are only so good. The screen resolution can keep getting better and better and better, but like ultimately, it's not going to change our experience. We've passed the singularity of TVs. TVs are better than human eyes can perceive. Basically,
only robots can fully enjoy TV now.
But on a massive cinema screen, for example, it could make a huge difference to have something that this resolution.
That said, like I can't remember if I talked about this on the podcast last time, but when I did an interview recently with the visual effects people the guy who'd done the visual effects on Vanity Fair, the TV show.
Yes,
he made an interesting point that was a show that was made for Amazon and ITV here in the UK. But those shows that are made in 4K, they're more detailed than a movie.
Yeah.
So that the amount of detail that goes in there, they're CGing in little tiny in the crowd scenes, the tiniest of people, much more detail than you get in a movie.
Yeah. And I think there are some things that have already been filmed in 8K.
Really?
A couple of films, I think. I can't remember exactly which titles, but the issue as well is when you're starting to film stuff in 8K. First is the cost of the cameras. So there are the company that makes really high-end cameras, Red, already makes some cameras that are capable of filming in 8K, but obviously they're really expensive. Yeah. And then the other thing is the size of the files, because if you're filming in much, much higher resolution, it's just going to increase the file size. So if you're talking about a whole TV series, never mind a film, if you had a whole TV series, that's a huge amount of data.
Streaming or downloading that. Yeah. And even making it. I mean, the fact that, again, these visual effects guys, they're working on these huge files, and every frame is this huge thing. So, yeah, it's... maybe so there's always a bit of a lag though, isn't there, between a new format and then actual content for it. So don't rush out and buy an 8K TV just yet.
I mean, you can't just yet. It will be out later this year.
So that we've no idea how much they would cost then in that case.
I'm not sure if we've got a price for it just yet.
I know,
although I know that, so this is the first 8K television that I think is going to be kind of publicly available, but I think there was a company that put out a screen that was an 8K screen earlier this year, and I think it was selling for $11,000.
Wow.
So
and there's nothing you can watch on it.
Yeah.
You can watch 2 4K movies side by side, but that's about it.
But I think that this is something that we're gonna. It's obviously a big kind of headline grabbing thing for the show. It's a great thing for Samsung to have and to be first on, but when it like you say, don't rush out and buy them or even plan to buy them anytime soon, because I don't think it would be really worth it. We're only sort of starting to get into the territory where 4K is worth investing in. I think increasingly we're seeing 4K content available on 4K streaming, and eventually that will be the industry standard. I
think maybe we should draw a line. Maybe we should just say 4K. That's it. That's where we draw the line. No more.
Yeah, we can focus our efforts on improving other areas of technology. I mean, there are plenty of other things that need improving. I could write a whole list.
Like not undermining elections, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
All those guys who are working on 8K TVs, just take them off that, put them on the election thing. We'll have solved it in no time.
Yeah.
You can have that one for free.
That's how it works,
Jack.
Right?
I'm just going to @Jack right now. Were there any other kind of big trends? I know Alexa is always a trend at these things.
Yeah, so we found out at the show that Alexa is now on over 20,000 different devices, which is up from 4,000 in January this year. So that's like a 5-fold increase in the number of Alexa-enabled devices available. And one of the sort of standout or more interesting Alexa-enabled devices from the show was from Huawei. It was they've kind of gone into the smart speaker market, and this is a kind of their rival to, I guess, the Google Home and Amazon's Echo and the Apple HomePod. Now their speaker is also a 4G router, and it's kind of pretty much the same as the others. My favourite thing about it, though, is that it's called the Huawei AI Cube, and let me tell you, it is not a cube. It is very much a cylinder.
That's absolutely brilliant.
I enjoyed the irony of that.
Yeah, no, that's excellent naming for Huawei. Well done, Huawei. It's like they're gaslighting us now. This is a cube. This is not a cylinder.
It's reinterpreted the cube.
Yeah, you could be like, hey Alexa, what shape is this? It is a cube. Alexa, it's not. Yes, it is.
And then eventually you'll start to believe it.
Eventually, yeah. Just be gaslighted by Alexa. We should say that Alexa is Amazon's voice-controlled personal assistant.
Yes.
Where you ask it to do things like play your music and all that kind of thing, and control your thermostat and all that kind of stuff. Are we any closer, do you think, looking at the stuff that came out at IFA, are we any closer to deciding which of these voice assistants is the best? Is it Alexa? Is it Apple? Is it Google Assistant or whatever it's called?
The thing is, I think it's not such a question of what's best as what's most ubiquitous at the moment.
Sure.
So when people are buying products to work with other products, what they want to see is consistency across the whole range of stuff that they've got.
And you've kind of got to choose an ecosystem, haven't you?
Yeah, a little bit. And until we can, maybe we'll reach a point where we can find some sort of interoperability between them. But that hasn't happened on other systems, on mobile operating systems.
You talk to Alexa, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to talk to Siri anytime soon. There are some
So
devices that have Google Home and a Google Assistant. It changes its name every 5 minutes. I lose track.
Yeah.
And Alexa on the same devices, which is kind of interesting.
So I don't think that necessarily that is a sign that Alexa is significantly better than all of these other assistants at all. It's just the fact that if you get it on enough stuff and it becomes the go-to thing, it's a little bit like Google getting Android on everything.
Right.
it's just people more likely, people know what it is, they get comfortable with it, they buy more of it.
Yeah.
So
Could become standard, by default.
Yes, and I think that seeing big companies like other big tech companies like Huawei, Huawei doesn't necessarily have to. It doesn't have any allegiance to any particular thing in terms of who it's going to partner with, and it partners with all of these companies on various things, and yet it's chosen Alexa. And I think as the more big companies we see choose, sort of like staking their claim and saying no, we're going with this because, I mean, maybe that is a sign that for them also it's not just the ubiquity, but it works for them in some way. Works with their technology, who knows. And we're also we're going to see Samsung, we heard this week as well that Samsung's going to be opening up its own rival, Bixby, to developers. I think
Bixby.
it's
they've been talking about that for years.
Bixby.
I like that name. It's quite old-fashioned. It sounds like a butler.
Rich, I actually think that this should be a challenge for you because you have a history of going with the real underdog. You were the one that was championing Windows Phone.
Yeah, and look where that ended up.
Yeah. I think you should be the one that takes Bixby and,
and drives
makes
it into the ground.
Case for it.
Yeah, so if I'll adopt it and then everyone will know that's the one not to go for. But we'll see. I mean, Samsung, they've sold a lot of phones and tablets. If they get a Bixby up and running properly, I don't know why it's taken them so long, but if they can get it up and running properly, there's a big captive market there, because that's what Siri is all about, right? So many people already owned iPhones that they put Siri on it, and it just automatically had millions of people using it.
Yeah, and obviously the issue that Samsung has is the same with when it introduced Samsung Pay. People also have Android Pay, which used to be Google Wallet. They also have Google Assistant available to them on an Android phone as well. So it's just it's not that it's not necessarily going to be their first choice. So yeah.
Well, there you go. So any other things exciting? Any less exciting novelty things that came out of IFA? What was your best experience?
My best experience was let me think. There was a very exciting. Oh, okay. Had some great beer. There was a gaming chair that a lot of people were very excited about. It was a massive thing. Okay. There was some LG had this kind of exoskeleton robot
the angel legs. Yeah.
Yeah. That was quite cool. There was some interesting fridges doing different things. I think there was one that could like vacuum seal within the fridge, vacuum seal your food. I don't really understand a lot of the appliance stuff. But
I love the fridge stuff coming out of IFA.
I mean, I think effectively they are all sorts of getting slowly smarter. But, and they are moving, some of those features are moving away from being like a novelty thing to being just like a standard inbuilt thing into fridges. Which is something for us all to get used to. I mean, it's not like we go out buying a fridge every day, is it? So, I mean, I don't know how long a fridge lasts, but several years. So I know that I won't be probably getting one of those anytime soon.
Well, that's the thing about a lot of household appliances, isn't it? Fridges and TVs, they're very, very occasional purchases.
Yeah.
So they've got to keep kind of trying to think of new gimmicks to sell these things.
Yeah.
But
some interesting fridges, and our appliance team did an amazing job of getting like all of them,
right?
And covering all of them. And we've got a big IFA roundup on the site that you can go to, and you can see all of the fridges and everything else. Some of the thrilling phones that are coming to Europe,
including the new BlackBerry.
Yeah.
Wow, I haven't said that for a good few years.
Yeah. You should go and check that out if you want to catch up with all of our IFA coverage. It's not too late. You can still go and see it. It's still relevant.
Even if you don't care about fridges. Look at the. I mean, honestly, it's worth it. Look at the crazy stuff that's going on in the world of fridges right now.
There was definitely something about. I remember a cool wine cooler thing as well. That was interesting.
There's some interesting stuff happening in the wine technology world. I can't believe I just said that, but there's there's all kind of different devices that will like put sensors on your wine bottles to tell you when it's ready to drink and all this kind of thing, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, what I really need is just something to tell me what wine is good to drink, and then maybe I can get to the point of like working out when it's good to drink.
Right. Yeah. Start baby steps.
Yeah. But I'm sure wine connoisseurs will appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's it for this week. If you haven't yet sworn off Twitter because it's a hell website of terrible stuff happening, then you can find us there as one of the few bright spots.
Yes,
you might say.
I only tweet nice things.
Yeah, and you tweet as?
I tweet as Katie Collins, just my name.
Just your name. I am at Rich Nightwell with a K, and you can also, of course, find CNET on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and wherever you get your social stuff from. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes if you've enjoyed the podcast, or a comment on YouTube, as long as it's again nice. Let's keep it clean. Well, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.